Welcome to Practical Talk Time. I'm your host, Usha Kumar. Today's segment is called One Man Up, and I have Kyle Pinto, who's the Men's Initiative Coordinator from the Women's Center of Greater Danbury, to talk on the subject. Hello, Kyle.
Hi, Usha. Thank you for having me.
Welcome.
Thank
It's such
you.
a pleasure to have you here. I've been waiting to have this program because I hear that this is a very new program introduced to the Women's Center
Yes.
in order to have men involved in ending domestic violence.
Right.
So how did this program come about?
Well, the Women's Center of Greater Danbury is an agency that's been in Danbury for almost 35 years now, and it's primarily women working with in crisis services, helping anyone who may feel victim of domestic violence, sexual assault, any life-changing, transitional issues. They're there to help. But recently, we've been trying to get more men involved in the domestic violence movement, basically saying that men can't just assume that this is a women's problem just because the majority of people who experience this may be women. Men still need to be involved. So we decided to start a program to educate young men and to get more men to speak out.
In the past, I think all these years, for decades, the Women's Center has been only helping the women and even sometimes other family members that are victims,
Yes.
right? And just to help them get back on their feet
Right.
or keep them safe.
Right.
So when did this idea come that we should get the men involved and have them end this kind of violence?
Right. Well, it's been kind of an ongoing thought. Unfortunately, most men don't realize they need to get involved or that they can get involved or what they can do. So our specific program has been in the works for a couple of years, but only recently, only about a year ago, did I start to come together with my team at the Women's Center and try to say we need to focus just on men and really get them in a circle and have them discuss what they normally talk about and get them on board with these issues. So it really is a brand new program for Danbury, but this issue has been starting to roll the last maybe 10 years. Nationwide, there are several programs that get men involved, men against violence. In Gloucester, Massachusetts, the whole community has gotten involved in the anti-violence movement.
What is that? Can you
Sure.
describe
So
that?
in Gloucester, Massachusetts, it's a fishing town, and they noticed back several years ago that they had a really unfortunate domestic violence problem. And
What kind?
Well, they realized that a lot of the men were working. It was more of a blue-collar town, and it was a very strong community, but they realized that the domestic violence shelter and crisis center, were overwhelmed with females and women specifically who were experiencing domestic violence, ranging the gamut from emotional abuse, physical abuse, economic, really the whole range. In the specific town, though, the men decided to get together and they said, you know what, we are part of this. We are part of this movement. Even though the majority of domestic violence is perpetrated against women, that doesn't mean that the majority of perpetrators, that doesn't mean that all men are perpetrators. What we're trying to say is that there's only a few people who actually commit this, but most men are not violent. So this town got together and they said, we can't put up with this anymore, and they actually got the artists of the town, they got all the different communities involved in that area, and they put on a parade. They kind of attached they built this big float. They have all these big signs that basically says, hands are not for hurting, and the really nice imagery there is that it's only men. It's all men standing up and saying, we're not going to put up with this, and we don't want to see this community fall to domestic violence. And since that time, they've had a huge turnaround, and domestic violence hasn't been an issue.
I see. And then what happened with the rest of the program? I mean, how did it
So
come
we
about?
looked at right. So we looked at that program. We looked at the White Ribbon campaign in Canada, which is filtered out into America.
And what is that?
The White Ribbon campaign is a simple campaign that gets men involved and asks men to take a pledge. And the pledge is simply that they refuse to condone violence of any kind against women and children. And it's a very simple campaign because all it is it has a little white ribbon, and the men will distribute the white ribbons either in pins or stickers or whatever. Basically, it's a way of having men communicate to other men. So we looked at that as kind of another model to take after.
And sometimes men can themselves be victims.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Of any kind of violence. It doesn't have to be domestic violence, right?
What we found in some of the research is that men are absolutely victims of every kind of violence. The only form of violence that men are not the majority of victims is sexual assault, is domestic violence. And this is where it's flipped. But you're absolutely right. Men are the majority of victims in all kinds of violence, robbery, road rage. We all know men have this big road rage problem. Robbery or assault and battery, things like that. We are the victims by far the most. The problem is that we're also the perpetrators, and we actually do the violence the most as well. So there's that idea there. Something is tied into masculinity. Something is tied into our belief about manhood.
So with all these programs in Massachusetts and in Canada, so we got the inspiration here.
Right. So we took that type of idea of community organization, and we wanted to get more men involved from a prevention standpoint. Not to go into a room of men and say, "Hey guys, don't do this. You're not, you're doing bad things."
Yeah.
No, absolutely not.
Nobody likes to be told what to do.
Exactly.
Do's and don'ts.
Right. And that method hadn't been working. And the people were trying that. People were trying to, yell at guys or tell them that they're bad or they're evil. It's not going to work that way. No one's going to listen. So we took a different approach. We said, listen, out of all the men in this room, most of you are non-violent. Most of you don't believe in violence. Most of you don't believe in sexism. And the problem is that you're all quiet, that everyone's really quiet, and we let the one or two people who may make a sexist joke or may actually be emotionally abusive, we let them take control. And so what I'm saying is for us guys who aren't violent, we need to stand up and we need to speak out. So we took some pieces from everywhere, from Canada, from Gloucester, Massachusetts, and really nationwide. This is starting to become a pretty big movement. So,
are there other organizations in other states that are also doing the same thing? Or is Danbury unique in having this program?
Well, we certainly are unique because we have various types of the program, or aspects of the program. There's a group in Connecticut at UConn. The UConn Women's Center is a really great resource out in stores for the undergraduate program. The Center for Women and Families, I believe, in Bridgeport, they have a group of men who have come together and volunteered their time to do the White Ribbon campaign and to make men more knowledgeable. But as far as Danbury is concerned, we are pretty unique. We have the program where we provide education. We go into the high schools, we go into the colleges, and we talk to the guys. I'll sit in a room of the football players, right, and the baseball players, and we'll have a real discussion about what we need to be talking about, as if it was a locker room, but at least this way I could guide the conversation and really have them understand what issues are at stake, what's the real prevalence of violence. So we're pretty unique in that aspect, but there are a scattering of programs that are trying to get more men involved. Problem is that it won't work unless everyone is involved, unless all the men really take this initiative on.
What is this phrase, one man up? Can you explain that?
Sure, yeah, that's a great situation, because we were trying to think of a good name, a powerful name for this group. And so I did a focus group with some college students, and we talked about what really gets you motivated, what really instills fire in you, to get on your feet and speak out or whatever. And apparently there's a very common phrase called, well, just man up, right? And so if someone's not, they're not showing their courage or they're not being strong enough, people say, well, man up. And the idea there is, well, what we're doing is we are encouraging this negative stereotype. We're encouraging men to be tough and strong and, you know, and aggressive. But at the same time, everybody in the room understood that this had a powerful meaning. So we changed it a little bit, and I said, well, what if it was one man up? What if it was one man in the room who stood up? Would that make a difference? And, you know, it kind of stuck, so.
Oh, it's such a wonderful word derived from slang, I guess.
Right.
So how does this phrase catch people's attention? I mean,
yeah, we have, when people say it in conversation all the time, they definitely, you know, they challenge each other, men and women. This is what we found too, is that men and women challenge each other and says, man up, or be a man, or be tough, or don't cry. These are all very traditional masculine ideas, and I'm trying to change it. So people, they know it, they've heard it before. So I try to take a twist on it, and it catches them because they've heard it before, and we try to move it in the direction that we want it to.
See, this is such a new initiative, right? Men's initiative.
Yes.
And this program is so new that most people in this area wouldn't have even heard of it, except those that attended your program, I guess. So can you tell us a little bit more about this?
Absolutely. Well, we started out because my role at the Women's Center is fundamentally as a community educator. So I primarily go out into the high schools, the middle schools, and we educate the health class on dating violence, on sexual assault, on gender images. And we try to give them some education because, unfortunately, we know that 60% of high school students, and this is nationwide, 60% of high school students will be in an abusive relationship before they graduate.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So now, again, to take note of that, only of that, 25% of that 60% is physical, where there's physical abuse. So there's a whole range of abuse that sometimes these high school, middle school kids don't really know about, like emotional abuse, economic abuse, verbal abuse. And so we try to educate them on how to recognize it, how to recognize those red flags. And by going into the schools, that's how really those are the group that we've been focused on so far.
Could you explain each of these a little bit?
Sure.
What constitutes physical abuse and what constitutes financial or economic abuse?
Of course, yeah.
And so on.
Right. What we do is we try to educate on the different levels of abuse. And of course, people know of physical abuse where there's hitting, punching, kicking, slapping, and these are all things that can happen in a dating relationship, in a friendship, in a marriage. It goes across. However, that tends to be one end of the spectrum. There is a great amount of violence that occurs interpersonally in a relationship, where it could be emotional, where somebody is really weighing psychologically on that other person. It could be just by very simple comments. It could be by different gestures, verbal abuse, which could lead to emotional abuse, constantly berating somebody, yelling at somebody, calling them names, or criticizing different things. These are all things. Economic abuse, where people could put forward so much money and they could say, well, now you owe me something. And the key thing there, the whole thread that's really key between all of that is that it doesn't have to do with anger. It doesn't have to do with a mental illness. It has to do with power and control. And that's what we try to educate our students about, is that it's about one person taking power and one person taking control over the other person. It doesn't have to do with somebody who just loses control and is angry all the time.
That's what most people would think.
Right.
That, oh, he just got mad at that moment. But sometimes they are drunk. When they do this.
Right. Now, of course, alcohol and drugs is a huge, factor that creates it or encourages it. But that's not the fundamental issue. The fundamental issue is power.
Power and control.
Exactly.
And people have to recognize that.
Right.
I mean, both the perpetrators and the victims.
Of course.
Have to know.
Right.
But then how do you address the perpetrator and tell him okay, or tell him or her. It could be a
Right.
woman too, right?
And
They
that's
can do
another
the same
thing. Exactly. That's another thing is that it does happen both ways. It is female against male or male against female, male to male, female to female. It happens across all different sexes. But what we find out, and part of the program of One Man Up and the Men's Initiative, is that we try to get men to stand up against other men. So a lot of times men might say, and this is what I found in my program, is that young men might say, well, it's not my business. Or if I see something in a store and I see kind of an abusive relationship, an unhealthy relationship, it's not my business, I don't want to get involved. And what we try to teach them is that you don't have to go up to the person and say, hey, cut it out, and throw a punch. You don't have to do that. There are ways to go around it, like use humor, make a joke to kind of distract, diffuse the situation. Check in with the person, say, hey, is everything okay? What's going on? Check in with the person who you feel might be uncomfortable. There are a lot of different tactics that we try to educate on. It doesn't have to be...
Give an example of humor, how to use humor in this case.
What I do with some students who are at college, let's say, and I'll say, let's pretend you're at a party, right? And that's the big thing, is they'll say they're at a party and they might see a friend of theirs who is all of a sudden being very quiet and isolated with someone else. Could be a man or a woman. And if you know that person and you know, wait a second, this doesn't feel right, this kind of is a red flag, we call it, then we'll say, you know what, go up to that person or that, that group person and say, oh man, this party is crazy, or oh, did you check out this, or hey, or make a joke, or oh my God, that homework was outrageous. Just by doing that, it kind of distracts them for a little bit and gets them to check in and see what's going on. So it's just an example,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in this program, how do you let people know that you are there in case they want some help?
Right. So one of the big things is that our program is not an agency that helps men who have been violent. We're not there to help men who who have been convicted of a crime or anything like that. But that we are a group that goes on the other side of the spectrum, and we try to get everybody. We really try to talk to everybody. So we are in the schools and we talk to the students. So we have a really strong presence in the schools, and we want to get young men involved. We have a presence in the athletic community. The big thing that we try to do is now we have to reach adult men, and we try to get out there and explain our program. So we do a couple of things. I will present. I will go to a group, maybe a Rotary Club or a father's group, or anybody who is a collection of men. I might go and present to them. Actually, one of the things that I do when I get there, and what's so powerful, is I go up to the group of men, I present all the information about violence, and I say, okay, now how many of you are willing to take a pledge to end violence? Because like I said, most of you in the room are not violent. So can you take a pledge to end violence and to challenge other people to take to end violence? Which
means if they come to know that someone else is violent in some way, then they would have to talk to them as a friend or as a co-worker.
Right.
But how much can other people how much can they get involved in?
Well, it could be one side of the spectrum where they actually go up to somebody and say, hey, you need to relax or diffuse a situation. Or it could be something as simple as our poster campaign, where it's just getting the word out. It's just taking the photographs, which is actually the photographs that you see here, is where all they have to do is sign a pledge and say, you know what, I'm going to be aware. I'm going to be aware of sexist language, of violent language, of violent imagery.
Which of this graphic do you want?
What we have here is, this is the I Stand With You campaign, right? And so this is what we do, is we try to take men. The I Stand With You campaign is basically, we take photographs of men, everyday men. I tried to call Justin Timberlake, but he wouldn't do it. But just everyday, regular guys, and I say, listen, will you pledge to challenge violence that you see in society? So this poster, we take the photograph, we turn it into a poster. Actually, some of the students from Henry Abbott Tech School in Danbury have been wonderful, and they've actually designed the posters. So we have just an example of a poster of a young man who is a police officer at WestCon, and we took this photograph of him, and the students at Henry Abbott Tech, or HATS, they designed it. And basically what it says is, you know, that these men pledge to end violence against women and children. Each of them signed this pledge that said, I stand with you against women and children, to end violence against women and children. So that's the big thing. And all it is it's accountability. We have another picture of a young man who, you know, from Hartford, who also says, you know what, I'm going to take the pledge, and it's very simple. I take the photograph, and what happens is then I'm educating the students at Henry Abbott Tech to educate them on this issue while they're designing the poster. What was really great about this campaign is then I took it to a fair. We had the Women's Center had a big walk. We have our annual fundraising walk, and I took it to a group of men, a family of men. I think it's 3 generations of men, and they all signed the pledge. And actually, when I dove into it, I found out that they were all related to Betty Corso, and Betty Corso, of course, is our founding mother at the Women's Center. She was one of the original women who really founded and started up the Women's Center. So these men, here it is 35 years later, these men are getting involved in the movement. So that's what was really great. It's a very simple action, but it stands out, and these pictures are going to have a pretty big impact in the community.
Yeah, I do understand that when children watch, you know, violence in their home, or they are victims of violence, then they grow up not knowing how to deal with it, and they think they have to deal with it the same way their parents did.
Exactly.
And I think they have to be educated too.
Right.
At this point.
Right.
And it'll be great so they don't grow up to do the same things that the previous generations did. Yeah.
And of course, you know, people have said, well, if someone is an abuser or violent, their family must have been a violent, or a male role model in their life must have been violent. But the truth is that that's not always the case. Sometimes, of course, but not always the case. What we're trying to do with these posters is counteract the role models they see in movies, in the video games, and this idea of being really, you know, being a man, and what does man up really mean? And so we're just trying to be that role model is what we're trying to do. So by having these men who understand the prevalence of violence against women and know that they should speak out, by having them show their face and be accountable, it helps these young men go to somebody. And what I do with these posters, I hang them in schools, I hang them in the community centers, so in the locker rooms. So a football team is walking through the locker room, and they see their captain saying, I stand with you against violence against women and children. And that has a pretty powerful effect for maybe a freshman or an oncoming athlete. They see that, wow, this is a great role model. I get it, you know.
How does a person who wants power and control, you know, how do they let go of that need?
Right. That's a, if I knew that,
now, how would you help them?
It's a very difficult thing, because that's really what's so fundamental, and it is very much in that person. They need that person. They need to blame other people. They will never take accountability for themselves. They'll never take a responsibility. It's incredibly hard, and there's actually an agency right down the street in Danbury, the Association of Religious Communities, that works with offenders, and I think they do a really great job working with them and try to get inside that person and try to say, well, you know, what exactly is this need that you need to you know, for power and control. But it's incredibly hard. That's why we're trying to take it one step behind and really work with the person before they even develop that need, before they develop that you know, that need to be in control.
They have to be content with themselves.
Exactly.
And with who they are.
Right. You bring up a great point. They have to be confident and have a good, strong self-esteem, right?
And again, with the older men, other than needing power and control, current day finance, economic conditions, you know, they also create so much stress in the world that people just don't know how to react to it. And they just take it out on their closest family members.
Right. Sure. I mean, there has been a rise because we see the economy is so bad, people are out of jobs, especially men, and that's something we've seen. Now women are more in jobs than men.
Really?
Right. You know, I'm not an economist, but that's what, you know, that's what we've seen. So it is a lot of stress. However, I just want to be careful to recognize that that's no excuse. You know, if someone loses a job or is down on their luck, it's hard to say, well, then there's an excuse.
It's even more important to keep your cool at that time.
Sure, absolutely. Understand what's going on.
And be focused on improving the condition than making it worse at home.
Right. Because if it's just that easy just to snap and say, well, my life is horrible, I'm going to take it on somebody else, it's very cyclical. So now the family involved is suffering. There are other ways to deal with this stress. Absolutely, there are so many other ways to deal with stress, and it comes down to that domestic violence isn't just someone who's stressed or someone who's in anger management or someone who's a drug addict or an alcoholic. It's not that. It's when it comes down to it, who has the power? Who needs the power? That's whoever needs the power tends to act out.
If men want to help themselves, what study materials or reading materials do you suggest?
Sure. There are some great authors out there that write specifically for men, not just academic. To develop our program, we do a lot of academic research, but there are some authors out there like Jackson Katz, with a K, and he was one of the founding guys that really said, wait a second, we need to understand what this violence is about. And he put together a program to address specifically athletes, young men. He's done a great job. There's a gentleman by the name of Alan Berkowitz, who has done a lot of writing on issues about putting programs together for men to speak up, right? And this whole idea of what's called social norming. So if I'm in a group of guys, let's say I'm on a team, I did used to play hockey and I was on a team, and so maybe some of the guys might have made some sexist jokes. And I would never believe that, but I would go along with it. So he says that we need to target those young men who don't believe it and to get them to stand up. So there's plenty of authors out there that talk about masculinity, manhood. Again, you know, what does it mean to be a man? You know, what's this cultural stereotype or ideal that we're striving for? Maybe that's something we need to focus on.
Yeah, I think this is a good way to prevent abuses and prevent bad crimes from happening. Because if you don't nip this in the bud, at some point somebody could lose control and then end up hurting another person very badly.
Right.
And this way at least we can control that kind of crime from happening.
It's an attempt. Like I said, 60% of high school students, we know that 1 out of 3 women will be a victim of sexual assault in their lifetime. We know that 1 in 6 men will be a victim of sexual assault in their lifetime. So the rate of violence is so high, and this is just a way to teach young men that that's not the way to go. There are other ways, right?
Thank you so much for all the valuable information you gave us today.
My pleasure.
And for those of you watching, until next time, goodbye.